Thank you very much, Bongi. Yes, this over a year now after it was first proposed that cash-strapped workers be allowed to access part of their pension funds to survive the COVID-19 storm, the debate is yet to be settled. Today, we heard from Finance Minister Tito Mboweni that these talks are ongoing, and for more on this, we are joined by Alternative Information and Development Center economist Dominic Brown. Thank you very much, Dominic, for joining us. You have done some research primarily on the Public Investment Corporation as the biggest, asset manager in the African continent, and you believe that South Africa doesn't have an investment culture that encourages, employment, that encourages, the closing of the payment, the wage gap, that actually encourages the end to poverty. Let's start there on this debate.
Thank you, Xolani. Yes, absolutely. And I think the first real example of it is what comes out of today's announcement by the Finance Minister in relation to the reprioritization of the budget to pay for the social relief of distress grant and some other issues following the crisis of unrest, which is partly related to the deep crisis of hunger and inequality that we have in the country. And of course, I think a first indication of a real investment would be the implementation of a decent basic income grant that many people have been calling for, coupled with the introduction of a net wealth tax to pay for this. But more than that, I think what we need to see is a government who wants to end budget cuts so that we can invest more in public education, in healthcare, in public transport and housing, the needs that many of the people in the country are not able to, are not receiving. They are excluded from receiving this. So we really need an end of austerity budgets. And then in terms of investment, in terms of investment, I should say, absolutely. The Public Investment Incorporation, which is predominantly made up of accumulated assets from the Government Employees Pension Fund, which has bounced back in a big way since the onset of the pandemic early last year. Most of these assets are actually invested in the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, mostly in financial capital, effectively, which is really about boosting the profits of big corporations and a few political and corporate elites. And so we should be redirecting a lot of this money to invest in the aforementioned needs, the housing, the transport, the electricity. And this is where the jobs can actually be created whilst addressing people's needs, decent paying jobs. And you can imagine if you couple the implementation of a decent basic income grant with investing in people's needs, we can really transform South Africa in a real way.
So, Dominic, your views are quite strong on the investment culture in South Africa. Let's talk about the proposal for workers to access a portion of their pensions. The PIC is a 1.9 trillion rand strong organization, and you say if this proposal were to see the light of day, it wouldn't put any more risk on the PIC than there is right now. Explain that to us.
So, Xolani, I have a slightly different view in that I think that instead of workers accessing their pensions now, what we could see is the implementation of a pension fund contribution holiday, which would mean that workers would get back about 6 or 7% of their income. But in addition to that, I would say that instead of allowing workers to access their pensions over and above the pension contribution holiday, What we should be doing is using the large amounts of accumulated reserves in the government employees pension fund that's currently being invested in the financial economy in the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, which, as I explained, makes the rich richer at the expense of the poor, at the expense of workers, and using that to well, in the first instance, paying the public sector workers their proper wage increases, and over the next 3 years, and not allowing the kind of the trying to split the workers in the public sector and the people who need those services, because their struggles are the same. When you reduce the public sector wage bill in the way government has, what you're seeing is actually the probability that you will see a decline in the size of the public sector, which is already highly undercapacitated. And this obviously contributes significantly to a lack of proper services and service delivery. So we will see a further decline in already lack of the rollout of real services. But in addition to that, besides ensuring that the public sector workers get their proper wage increases over the next 3 years, and also that we see the expansion of the public sector to meet people's needs through service delivery, we need great investment in the infrastructure that's required to deliver these services. And so what we should be seeing is a huge amount of money moved from the JSE to the borrowing to government. The government employees pension fund can borrow to government at below market interest rates, which will still ensure proper returns on investment for public sector workers and the government employees pension fund, but would also be a means of creating a large level of resources for investing in housing and transport and education and healthcare, in addition to paying the workers their wages and employing more workers, in fact, to the public sector to address the massive unemployment crisis. So you can see the narrative that says that the unemployed are, and the basic income grant and the payment of the public sector wage bill are separate issues are actually untrue. They're actually very connected, and they're connected to this idea of austerity. And that's why ultimately, Xolani, I know we've probably run out of time. The real message here is 3 points. 1, we have to end austerity. 2, we must implement a basic income grant and expand the size of the public sector, including paying public sector workers their proper wages so that they can deliver the services that they need. And 3, for a real just recovery, we need to invest in a real industrialization program that includes reclaiming Eskom and all state-owned enterprises to serve the public good and not for a profit model. And I think this is, if this is implemented, this would show that this is a government who cares for the people.
Dominic, you were right there. We are out of time, but that was a mouthful. You don't only think that a government, should allow, workers to access portions of their, pensions, but, you believe that a basic income grant is something that, should be introduced there.